for those of us that may not know what intertextuality is, what
Mhm.
is intertextuality and why should we care?
Oh, intertextuality is so like let's say if you're reading along and let's start with John 1 because I just was working on John 1 because that section of 1 through 18 is part of my thesis, right? So you're reading along and you're like, wow, this is sort of familiar. This sounds like something that maybe I've heard before. Where have I heard this before? And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, your mind's immediately going to go back to Genesis 1. And that's what intertextuality is. It's like I see something in scripture, and then I'm going to either go backwards or forwards because it goes both directions to find those things that link back to where you are. So that's going to take you, John 1's going to take you back to Genesis 1, and it's also going to take you to several places in Revelation with a lot of stops in the middle between those two places. So it's just these like, think of them as like hashtags or hyperlinks in between the different verses in the Bible. And somebody did this really cool rainbow like graph thing of this, and there's over 60,000 of these in scripture. So
Wow.
it is really amazing how many links there are. Because really what happens is I think sometimes we get this idea and think about like each book of the Bible is its own kind of thing. And biblical theology, this big emerging field, is going, yeah, no, there's a bigger story here. And so all of these books are in conversation with the bigger story and the bigger conversation. And so they actually interact with each other, which is what intertextuality is how do these books converse with each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first time intertextuality really jumped out at me was I'm a rural pastor in Canada, and a couple years ago I decided I was going to preach through the first three chapters of Revelation, the seven churches,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really my first time. I mean, Revelation is always intimidating, to say the least, and and it was my first time really taking a serious go at it, and so I'm reading through commentaries because I'm just terrified. I don't want to get this. I don't want to get this wrong, and I'm just floored because it was the first time I really looked at it from a scholarly point of view. And like some scholars think the Revelation alone could have up to 500, not even quotes,
Mm-hmm.
just allusions
Mm-hmm.
to the Old Testament. Because John, I don't know about John, he doesn't like to tell you when he's quoting, does he? He likes to make it as
No.
difficult as possible.
But actually, the funnest one for at least for me anyway, because I started out in Old Testament and prophets was my specialty. I love the prophets; those guys are amazing.
Mm, mhm.
And we've been going through Matthew at my church, and that dude is like the prophet ninja. You're going along, and all of a sudden, he's like pulls out a prophet reference, and you don't even, unless you're like familiar with the prophetic books. He's pulling stuff all over the place. You can't go 2 or 3 verses without tripping over several different prophets that Matthew is laying out there. So
Mhm.
it really does, I think, make it one a whole lot more fun because it turns into a treasure hunt because you read something and like for example let's look at Hosea 1. Let me pull that up because it's hard for me to do it from memory. There's so much good stuff in there. Give me just a second. Let me move this out of the way so I can see. So if you look at Hosea 1:1, uh, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Hosea, son of Berai, in the days of King Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel. There is like, you could write a book just on all of the links of things and information that is bringing with it. So we know who Hosea's father is Berai, but we don't know really who Berai is. There's a couple listed in the Bible, but none of them are like big names that we would know. But interestingly, like Hosea is a prophet to the north. Why do we have 1, 2, 3, 4 kings of Judah listed before the one king of Israel? Like there's a whole lot that's going there. And each of those kings in there. So Uzziah, not a great guy. Jotham, not a great guy. Ahaz, an absolute disaster. Hezekiah turns himself around. Those are all kings of Judah, and that's the south. So why is Hosea packing a whole lot of kings of the north or the south into a message to the kings of the north? It's really bizarre. Like, what is going
Right.
on here? And then you get into Joash, king of Israel. So now you're bringing in the division of the kingdoms. You've got this whole story of um, uh, Jeroboam and everything that goes wrong with Jeroboam, and son of Joash, who wasn't a great guy either. And so there's a whole lot of baggage that's coming into Hosea. So you've got a lot of the trauma of the split of the kingdoms. You've got you're about to get, it's a contrast between the north and the south. So the north just completely goes crazy and off the rails with their idol worship and doing all kinds of things that they're not supposed to be doing at all. But you've got the south, who is trying, depending on the king, to keep it together a little bit. Like Ahaz turns it around, tries to, and he's given, through his prayers and intercessions, given an extension on his life. And he, but you just kind of see there's so much here in the history of Israel. So you've got Samuel, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, and there's a whole lot of First and Second Chronicles, because Kings and Chronicles kind of tell the same story from different perspectives. So you've got 6 books of the Bible all packed into one sentence in Hosea 1:1 right there. But that's some of the fun of intertextuality, because you get to go look up all those people and those places and kind of really like thinking in your head, okay, so when someone who is receiving Hosea originally and they read that sentence, they're going to know who all these guys are, and they're going to know all the baggage from the wars and everything else that's going on in all of that history. It's going to be a sore spot. So why are we starting with all of this, with this deep bruise and wound that's already hanging over Israel and Judah? So it gets really fun and really fascinating, really, really fast. And I used to hate genealogies, but now, I just, so in our Matthew study, the whole almost first chapter is all genealogy, and people are like, oh, and I'm like, genealogy, awesome. Let's go look all these people up, because all of them are in there for a reason. And, some of them we have been preserved and know who they are. Some of them we don't, but it all paints a picture of all of the story that's coming in with us. So Matthew is bringing in the entire Old Testament in that genealogy. And so you've got the whole story from creation in Genesis 1 all the way down to the diaspora and the return from exile that gets us to the end of Chronicles. So, because I shift Chronicles to the end of Malachi there, because it kind of wraps up the look of Chronicles. What it does is it's sitting there like, here's where we're at. How did we get here? And how do we not get back here again? And then they're waiting for the one who's going to come and fix it.
Right.
And so it's just really, it kind of leaves you with this 400 years of pondering. How did we get here? How do we not make this mistake again? And now we're waiting for the one who's going to come fix it and put it all back together.
Right. Well, and I mean, you talk about hyperlinks. That is the First and Second Chronicles. That'll get you there.
Oh boy.
What is it? Is it like 8 chapters of just names?
It is the first 9 chapters of Chronicles is all genealogy, except one verse in chapter 4 that's just kind of one verse narrative that's kind of shoved in, the shoehorned in there, which is a really fun puzzle that I don't think anybody has completely figured out what's going on there exactly, except it's the point of a chiasm of all of those genealogies, kind of pinnacles that they're in chapter 4 with that one verse narrative. But the first 9 chapters of Chronicles, it's like every possible genealogy you could find, trying to figure out and grapple with, who are we? You got these stragglers coming in from all over the place. You've got to reestablish the priesthood. You've got to get worship back up and going. You've got to get the temple built. Who are we? How do we function? you know, trying to find the law, trying to get Leviticus back up and going. Like there's so much going on there. And all of those genealogies are trying to sort out who's from what tribe. Do we even have any priests? Do we have anybody who's eligible to be a priest? What happened to the Levites? Like it's really fascinating watching them grapple, trying to figure out who they are now.
Right. Yeah. One of my actually a couple months ago, I had Dr. Josh Brolin on. We were talking about slavery stuff in the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so funny because like you talk to these Old Testament Bible guys, and even if they're like not Christians, like I think he's an atheist, and he's just a Bible nerd, you know, like he just is, and he gets excited talking about
Mm-hmm.
it. And so he told me, which I thought was really interesting. He said that his favorite intertextual portion in the Bible is in Daniel
Yep.
when he is feeding off of Jeremiah and he suddenly realizes the 70 years are up and we're about to be released back into the land again. And then he
Mm-hmm.
has this revelation and he realizes, oh no, it's not 70 years, it's 70 weeks. And that goes into this idea that maybe even when they're back in the land, they're still in exile.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that just really it just stood out to me because it really is everywhere when you know where to look for it.
It is. And then it gets really interesting, that whole thing, when you start pulling in Josephus and Philo, because they are both, you know, Jewish scholars who are in the employ, willingly or not, of Rome. And so they are trying to grapple with this question of why are we still here? And
Mm-hmm.
they're dealing with, you know, I was reading this really, so if you haven't read it yet, I would highly recommend a book by Dr. Jason Staples that talks about Israel. I think the name of it off the top of my head. Hang on. I'll explain it while I'm pulling the name of it up. But he talks about all of this confusion about Israel and Second Temple Judaism. It's called The Idea of Israel in the Second Temple period. And it is absolutely fantastic. Probably the best book I have read on trying to settle this question of Israel. And he really kind of walks through all the different points. And he talks about how, like, Josephus and Philo have sneak all these Daniel references in there in such a way that Jewish readers are going to get it, but the Roman readers aren't going to see it as a threat.
Uh-huh.
So it just kind of goes right over. So
Yeah.
people have misunderstood Josephus and Philo because they're not catching those intertextual links back to Daniel, that they kind of sneak in under the guise of something that's an irrelevant off comment that they make on something here or there. And Staples talks about this in his book quite a bit. So I mean, you know, even the intertextuality with the Second Temple Jewish literature, and you got the whole, you know, then you pull in like Maccabees, and it's really interesting to see how we get from Chronicles to Matthew and this progression.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. Even as you were saying that, I remember reading Josephus, and when he's going through talking about all the books of the Hebrew Bible, he gets to Daniel and the prophecy of the stone rolling in that's about to destroy the statue, and he just flat out says, "I'm not going to tell you what it means,"
Yep.
because he thinks it means God's going to take out Rome too, right? And
Yeah.
which is just, I think that stuff is just fascinating.
Yeah, because each in their own way, they're trying to grapple with, we're back from the diaspora, and the covenant hasn't been reestablished yet. All 12 tribes are not reunited back into the land yet. So we're still waiting. Daniel's still not fulfilled yet. So now what do
Hmm.
we do? We're
Hmm.
still waiting. And that sets up the messianic expectation. And they're still looking for these things and looking back at the types and the archetypes in the Old Testament. So we're looking for a Joshua figure who isn't Joshua, but will do what Joshua does. We're looking for an Abraham figure who isn't Abraham, but will do what Abraham does. We're looking for a David figure who isn't David, but will do what David does. Like, so we're looking for a prophet, priest, king who does only what God can do, which in their minds is really difficult because those things don't mix. Prophets kind of off do their own thing, and priests have a role and kings have a role, and they're not supposed to mix. So a prophet or a priest can't be a king, and a king can't be a prophet, according to the Torah, Leviticus, Exodus. There's several places, Deuteronomy, where that's made very, very clear. Those are two very distinct jobs, have two very distinct functions, and they don't cross. They're different tribes. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. So waiting for someone who takes on all of those roles would be a little confusing. So it's easy to understand how they miss, but to us it's so obvious. Like, yes, this is the Messiah, but we're also looking at it backwards because we're on the other end of the resurrection. So, it's easier to go back and read a finished book and say, this is the way that the story unfolded because we saw the whole story. Now, this is where intertextuality can get us in a little bit of trouble with, like, the book of Revelation, and you've got all these people and all their, like we did like last month, everybody was supposed to be raptured out of here at the end of September, and
like 3
that
times.
didn't quite happen. And right. So, you also have to use some wisdom in this kind of thing, because you don't want to get crazy with all this, and people get nuts with Daniel and the 70 years or 70 weeks, and you get all kinds of charts and graphs and stuff, and you just kind of like, okay, let's take a breath, folks, because numbers are funky in Hebrew in the first place, and they do really wonky things with them, and especially if it's prophetic language, all bets are off unless the interpreter shows up. So you'll see places as you go through the Old Testament, and it's in the New Testament too, but you'll see someone's given a vision. And if it's something that we're supposed to think about and contemplate, an interpretation isn't given. But if it's something that's very clearly supposed to be known, the messenger will say, and by the way, this is what it means. So there's no clue and there's no question. We know what that's supposed to mean. The rest of the time, we're supposed to just, like, it's something to think about. And this is where intertextuality can help us or hurt us, depending on how crazy and offshooting we get with some of those connections that we try to make with things.
Oh yeah. No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. In a way, I suppose. I was listening to N.T. Wright, one of his lectures, and he had mentioned that there are like 12 or so messiahs on either side of Jesus' life. And so I suppose in a way, though, they were kind of doing the same thing that rapture theology people do today, right? Like, they were looking for the end of the age and the Messiah to come. And I imagine some of these false messiahs, they would have been going into the Old Testament, finding proof texts and trying to show why they are the Messiah, and they were going to bring in the new age for Israel. So I suppose in a way, we've always been doing this.
We've been doing this for a really long time, because there's something about being human where we don't sit with tension very well. There is something about being human where we need closure. Whatever that closure is, we need that closure of knowing. And that's just not how the interplay between the physical and the spiritual works. And I mean, I would actually argue the case that the ancient mind, there was no separation between the spiritual and the physical. It all happens at the same time. And so you don't have this break between, I do this in my everyday life, and then this is my worship experience, and my like, these are the things that are happening in my spiritual life, and these are like the ancient Near East mind, like, especially the earliest Old Testament Torah and those civilizations. If you said something like that to them, they would look at you completely confused and wouldn't even understand what you were talking about, because that's not an idea. And even when you get into the New Testament and the Greek, and it breaks down all these things about spirit, soul, body, and all of this kind of thing, it's not meant to break it all apart. It's not Gnostic or Neoplatonistic theology. it's helping give us better language to navigate how to talk about these things in a way that we can get our heads around, but it's still the same very much integrated thought behind it.
Mhm.